Good evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 39 of Radio Free Innsmouth, only on the Hate Bus. We are going to do some hardcore goth metal posting tonight, and what better way to open our look into that most maudlin and tortured genres than by listening to the first track off the first My Dying Bride album. So My Dying Bride are part of what's known as the Peaceville Three. So that would be My Dying Bride, Anathema, and Paradise Lost. The three big innovators of gothic doom metal on Peaceville Records in the early 90s. Nowadays, Peaceville is probably more well known for being the launching point and perennial home label of Dark Throne and Autopsy. But believe it or not, back in the day, these three gothic metal bands are their main selling point. Nobody really heard anything like that before, outside of maybe Typo Negative and Catatonia from Sweden. But that mixture of like death metal brutality with gothic sentimentality, there's a lot of Sisters of Mercy and Fields of the Nephilim style shit going on in there. It was pretty unique at the time, and unlike most of the genre's followers as of late, this stuff still holds up 20, 30 years later. So My Dying Bride, their first album is kind of a big deal for me. A lot of people ignore it in favor of their second album, Turn Loose the Swans. But I like their first one a lot because it does a really interesting combination of some of the most brutal death metal you'll hear with this kind of weeping, overwrought, gothic sentimentality. And it actually works, and it creates a profoundly disturbing effect. For instance, consider the follow-up to the intro to Sear Me, wherein the main motif from that melody is tortured and ripped asunder in a very death metal manner. Insert Wagnerian leitmotif reference here. See, that's the melody from earlier, but it's been considerably death metaled up, if there is such a verb. And instead of falling into that kind of minor key thing, the end of it gets very dissonant. And check out this riff, it's total Autopsy, which makes sense since they're both on Peaceville. I should do an episode on Autopsy someday. They're like one of my favorite bands. So obviously very brutal. Meanwhile, we have Paradise Lost, whose second album was actually called Gothic. And that's probably the most popular out of all the early Peaceville gothic metal albums. Some might argue that they like Turn Loose the Swans a bit more. But as far as I've seen, Paradise Lost's Gothic is the big one, which features some truly stellar interaction between melodic lead guitar and sort of an ambient rhythm guitar in a way that was very influential on another band featured on this program, the criminally underrated Gorment.
Lives within all fear.
And now we come to one of the most influential things about this album, unfortunately. Contrast between clean female vocals and gnarly male death metal vocals, which is done well here. Just about everywhere else it happens, it fucking sucks, and it eventually led to Evanescence and garbage like that. But enough about that. Check out this lead guitar, it's so fucking cool. Musical simulation of bleeding out. But the main band I wanted to talk about tonight was the third of the Peaceville Three, Anathema, who have kind of a weird position in the death metal community. Most death metal people ignore all of their stuff, because whereas My Dying Bride always kept it pretty death metal and Paradise Lost wandered away from death metal and then has since come back to it, Anathema did 2.5-ish depending on your definition of death metal, doom metal albums, before turning into this sort of weird alternative rock thing that a lot of really shitty metal fans like to pretend is really profound, especially in comparison to their obviously immature and primitive early music. But both of these positions are wrong. Anathema might be my favorite of the initial Peaceville 3 gothic doom metal bands. And I'll tell you why. They came out a little bit after the other two. Some people see them as a knockoff, but actually they have the most subtle songwriting out of all three. You know, My Dying Bride, very overwrought with the violins and the unexpected violent transitions into death metal. Paradise Lost has all the cool lead guitar tricks and such. Anathema has very inventive songwriting going for it, where they use very dissonant things in an almost melodic way, kind of generating this paradox. For instance, the second song on their first album, which was called Serenade, the second song is called Sweet Tears. Let's have a listen to that. It features a very drum-heavy intro, which presages the very percussive element of the song's main riff. And what's this? Sort of a death metal take on bluesy, Black Sabbath-y, hard rock guitar flourishes. A little Celtic Frost, hey there! But check out that main riff. It uses that weird sliding guitar motion, which would normally just be a weird little flourish. But instead it's part of the main riff, so they're using very dissonant things in a melodic context, with a wandering lead guitar over it, very layered and orchestral sounding. So that's what I mean when I say the songwriting is subtle. They use a lot of layers and unexpected little tricks in a clever way. That wandering guitar is melodic, but also very forlorn and desiccated sounding. Forlorn, not forlorn. God damn, I can't talk tonight. It's late. And then check this out. We get a response to that earlier guitar melody, which leads into an explosion of melodic lead guitar. An emotional climax. There's not too much out there that sounds like this. Maybe certain moments of later doom metal bands like Esoteric picked up on Anathema's unorthodox usage of the six-stringed instrument. There's another song on this album that's even weirder in how it uses structure. It sort of alternates between loud and soft, but not in a dissonant, hard-impacted My Dying Bride way. How do they do it? Well, let's find out. So a little bit of jangly, very Sisters of Mercy-esque clean guitar with some sad-sounding narration over it, talking about sighing and wondering why and such. It's called gothic metal for a reason. Then dig the transition into heavy, dissonant riffs that are going to utilize some artificial harmonics in a very unexpected way. The harmonics are actually part of the melody of the riff instead of just being kind of a la Pantera or whatever. So you can kind of see where this song is going. It's going to be an alternating thing going on between those two components. But just when you expect them to do that whole just kind of A-B song structure without a lot of terribly interesting things going on, they instead build the song up to this very rocking metal climax. So there's that riff from earlier. But now we drop out the percussion to get into some new territory. So obviously this part kicks a lot of ass. And this is what actually qualifies this album for gym metal status. Maybe not on a cardio heavy day, but definitely on a heavy lifting day. And a very nice neoclassical, Yngwie-esque solo, dripping with emotion and atmosphere. I can listen to that riff all day. That's the gooey shit right there, man. I like when they let solos kind of bleed over into the next section of riffs without like missing a beat. When it's done well, it's really cool. A more recent example of this would be the second song on the second horrendous full length. I think it was called Weeping Relic. But anyways, Anathema, before they descended into just kind of semi-prog rock, but mostly just kind of maudlin alternative rock type stuff, they had one more good EP in them that was called Serenades. No, it wasn't called that. Fuck. That was the name of the first album. Boish. It was called Pentecost III, and it's got a cool cover with like a dragon on it or some shit. The first Anathema I ever heard. And this one has really long songs that aren't necessarily technically complex, but structurally they're very interesting. Definitely taking a lot of influence from Sisters of Mercy, Tideland shit. For instance, the first song is called Kingdom. Wait, no, that Sister Mercy's album was called Floodland, not Tideland. Womp womp. Tideland was that weird movie made by one of the Monty Python guys. Forget I said that, and let's just listen to the beginning of Kingdom. So we got a similar thing going on as to that prior song, Sleepless, with a jangly, clean guitar motif, but this one's a bit more laid back, and it goes on for longer instead of hard cutting into that more dissonant stuff. Instead they just start to layer more and more guitar sounds onto it. So in a sense it's more similar to Russian classical music than it is to the German Romantic classical music that influenced earlier Anathema. See, the thing about the Russians is they like to meditate on a singular theme and add more voices to it, whereas the German classical composers were big into counterpoint and shifting themes around. Perhaps a difference in the Slavic and Germanic folk souls, who knows? So we've added in these screaming guitar feedbacks, but they're done in a melodic and calming way. Once again, the dichotomy between the dissonant and the beautiful. Seems to be a running theme with a lot of the bands I listen to. Maybe it's because it's like life in general. Beauty found in decay. Very gothic. Some people might find this boring, but I think it's actually very interesting when you pay attention to how layers are added in and subtracted. Like that big echoey snare sound there too. A lot of times that kind of snare sound doesn't work in death metal, such as on the second Death LP, Leprosy, which had that fucking 80s disco snare. Did not suit the material at all, but in this case the drum sound is perfect for what they're trying to do. So as we go farther into the song, we see more intensity building up. Now we work in the distorted guitars and the vocals, once again reminiscent of Celtic Frost, this time the gothic albums rather than the black thrash ones, although there's plenty of and hey that are going to come later. So Celtic Frost in general had a major influence on these guys. You see these kind of spider webbing melodic lead guitar lines, never really settling down anywhere on a sustained resolution. Instead, they're left to wander like ghosts in the night. Now we have an unearthly pulse to the music as things begin to take on more of a structure, which of course will culminate in a climax very similar to Sleepless's. In fact, this track in general is similar to Sleepless, it's just a bit more long-winded. So let's have a listen to that. You can see here, it's kind of built to this pulse and then it starts to unravel itself. Celtic Frost time. Good stuff, man. It's another one of those parts which speaks for itself. Obviously, this is pretty fucking metal. If you don't like it, you're probably a poser. I don't know what to tell you. Sorry. Maybe listen to stuff like this more often until you learn to like it. Homosexual. So sadly, this EP was sort of the peak of Anathema, as after that, they got rid of their original vocalist and totally softened up their sound. In fact, I think I have a recording of a latter-day Anathema studio exercise on hand.
Jump down, and then say some fucking gay shit. I'm gay!
To be fair, their first album without their original vocalist, The Silent Enigma, shows a bit of promise, and I could see myself getting into it despite my initial dislike for it, much like I didn't like Gorefest's third album, Erase, the first time I heard it. Now it's one of my favorites, but I kind of doubt it, and their later stuff really doesn't do anything for me, despite all these people assuring me that it's some kind of high art and then completely shitting all over early Anathema, which was the original high art, in my humble opinion. So that's all for me attempting to defend my love of early goth metal to you fine folks out there. Tune in next week where I'm gonna probably talk about another band or something.